Most people spend their financial lives trying to close a gap, the gap between where they are and what they believe wealthy is supposed to look like. They have been handed a definition of success that was never designed to make them rich. It was designed to make them spend, and so they work harder, earn more, and direct every increase into the performance of a life that looks like the one they were told to want, while the actual engine of wealth, the quiet compounding of money and behavior over time, never gets started because there is never anything left over to compound. The 6 habits I am going to share with you today are not the habits the world rewards with attention. They are not impressive at a dinner party. They will not make you look successful to people who have never thought carefully about what success actually costs. But they are the habits that produce the man I just described, the one nobody looks at twice, and they are far more accessible than anything that comes with a complicated name or a high barrier to entry. They require nothing except the willingness to see money in a fundamentally different way from how you were taught to see it, and that, as it turns out, is both the simplest and the rarest thing in the world. The people I am describing did not build what they have through extraordinary discipline or heroic restraint. They built it through something much quieter: structures. Quiet arrangements designed deliberately and then repeated so consistently that the right financial behavior stopped being something they had to choose each time and started being something that simply happened, the way breathing happens, without requiring attention or energy, or the kind of willpower that fails precisely when it is most needed. Understanding that distinction is more valuable than any individual habit I am about to name, because it changes where you look for the problem. The problem is almost never motivation. It is almost always architecture. Habit 1. They treat their financial numbers like a pilot treats instruments, not with fear, but with attention. Consider for a moment what happens in most households at the end of a month. The bank balance is approached with a particular kind of dread, a tightening that arrives before the screen even loads, a subtle hesitation that has become so practiced it no longer registers as unusual. And so people either look, brace themselves, and feel a verdict has been delivered about who they are, or they decide not to look at all because the act of not knowing feels less threatening than the act of knowing. Both responses share the same root. Money has become something emotional rather than something informational. And the moment money becomes emotional, the ability to manage it clearly is already compromised. The quietly wealthy have trained themselves out of this completely. They check their numbers regularly, without drama, with the same practical interest a pilot brings to an altimeter, not because anything is wrong, but because awareness is the mechanism by which you stay in control of the direction. They look at what came in, what went out, and what the balance represents in terms of the decisions that are now available to them. Nothing in that sequence involves a judgment about their worth or their intelligence. It is simply information, looked at calmly, and used to make the next decision slightly better than the last one. The Financial Planning Association has studied what it calls money scripts, the unconscious beliefs that govern how people relate to financial information. 3 of the 4 patterns they identified are consistently associated with financial damage: avoidance, worship, and status seeking. The 4th, which they call money vigilance, defined as a calm, regular, unemotional engagement with financial reality, is the one that consistently correlates with better outcomes and higher net worth. The quietly wealthy are not born with money vigilance. They develop it by deciding, at some point, that the numbers are not about them. They are just numbers. And once that shift is made, everything that follows becomes considerably more manageable. There is something almost counterintuitive about this, because most people assume that looking at money more often would produce more anxiety, not less. The opposite is what actually happens. Anxiety around finances is, in almost every case, the product of uncertainty, of not knowing how bad it is or how good, or what the current reality actually demands. Regular, calm engagement with the numbers removes the uncertainty, and without uncertainty, the dread has nothing to feed on. The check-in becomes routine. Routine becomes the foundation on which every other financial habit is built. Habit 2, they have made the pause their most powerful financial instrument. The world you are trying to build wealth inside of has been engineered at considerable expense and sophistication to prevent you from pausing. The countdown timer that appears when you're about to close a web page, the notification that tells you stock is running low, the message that says 17 people are currently viewing this item. Behavioral scientists have a name for what these mechanisms produce: urgency-induced arousal, which is a measurable physiological state in which the capacity for deliberate, forward-looking decision-making is significantly reduced. You feel it as the sense that you must act now or lose something. What it actually is, in almost every case, is a manufactured emotion with a commercial purpose. The quietly wealthy have, through repeated practice, developed an almost reflexive immunity to this state. When something activates the feeling of urgency, their first move is to do nothing. They have built a window somewhere between 30 and 90 days for significant purchases, between the moment desire arrives and the moment a decision is made. And what that window reliably reveals is this: the majority of things that feel like necessities on a Tuesday feel like vague memories by the following month. The must-have that commanded their full attention in March has been entirely forgotten by May. The upgrade that felt essential when income went up has lost its grip within a season. What the pause actually preserves is not the price of the item. It is the time that money needs to compound. A dollar that was not spent on an impulse purchase in your 30s does not produce a marginal improvement in your financial future. It produces, through the mathematics of compound growth across decades, an outcome so dramatically different from the alternative that most people refuse to believe the numbers when they are shown them. The quietly wealthy understand this not as an abstraction but as a lived reality, which is why they do not experience the pause as sacrifice. They experience it as protection of the one thing that cannot be manufactured once it has been spent. Habit 3. They invest first and most seriously in what cannot be taken from them. There is a category of asset that appears on no balance sheet, carries no ticker symbol, cannot be seized in a legal dispute, cannot be devalued by inflation. The quietly wealthy invest in it constantly, without the hesitation most people feel when spending on something they cannot hold in their hands. That asset is applied understanding, the specific, practical knowledge of how money works, how value is created, how to read a financial situation before it becomes a financial emergency. They read with purpose and regularity. They pay for courses when a course addresses something they genuinely need to understand. They seek out people who are further along than they are, and in those conversations they spend far more time listening than speaking. They have made a calculation, either explicitly or through accumulated experience, that most others never arrive at. A book that genuinely changes how you think about a financial decision does not just improve the next choice you make. It improves every choice of that kind you make for the rest of your life. The return on that purchase extended across a career is essentially immeasurable. Thomas Stanley, who spent decades studying the actual financial behavior of American millionaires, found that the pattern separating those who built lasting wealth from those who simply earned high incomes was not investment strategy or market timing. It was the consistent investment in financial self-education begun long before there were significant assets to manage. They did not wait until they were wealthy to learn how wealth was built. The knowledge preceded the wealth and, in large measure, produced it. A business can fail. A market can move against you. Real estate can lose value. But what you understand about how money behaves, how compounding works, how to recognize and avoid the most common financial traps, that understanding is yours permanently, in every economic climate at every income level. Habit 4. They have replaced one question with a better one. When most people make a financial decision, they are asking a question that feels thorough but is actually incomplete. The question is, how much does this cost and can I afford the payment? That question evaluates a transaction. It tells you whether a purchase is numerically possible. What it does not tell you, and this is the omission that quietly ruins financial futures, is whether the purchase is directionally wise. Whether it moves you toward where you're going or away from it. Whether the capital being committed returns something, or whether it simply departs and leaves nothing behind except the memory of a purchase that felt reasonable at the time. The quietly wealthy ask a different question. Before any significant financial commitment, a vehicle, a course, a piece of equipment, a service, they ask, what does this return and across what time frame? That single substitution restructures the entire decision. A car purchased with a loan at interest is no longer simply an expensive car. It is a negative return asset consuming monthly cash through principal and interest, depreciating in value from the moment it is driven away, and preventing the same capital from compounding in a direction that would produce something rather than consuming something. Looked at through that lens, the decision is no longer about the payment, it is about the position. Understand clearly what this habit is not. It is not a prohibition on spending. The quietly wealthy spend generously on their health, on the education of their children, on quality in the areas of life where quality produces a genuine daily return, on experiences that build the relationships that matter to them. What they resist, with a consistency that has become structural rather than willful, is the category of spending whose sole purpose is external validation, the purchase designed to signal an arrival rather than to produce one. Every dollar directed at that signal is a dollar that was never given the chance to compound. And across decades, that distinction is the entire story. Habit 5. They protect the distance between what they earn and what they spend as though their freedom depends on it, because it does. Researchers in behavioral economics have a term for the phenomenon that quietly dismantles the financial futures of high-earning people: lifestyle inflation. The mechanism is almost poetic in its predictability. Income goes up. Within months, spending rises to fill the new space. The apartment gets upgraded because the new salary supports it. The car gets replaced because the monthly payment is now manageable. The restaurants change. The subscriptions multiply. Each individual decision is reasonable, even sensible, viewed in isolation. Together, they absorb the entire increase, and the person who was financially tight at $60,000 a year finds, to their quiet horror, that they are financially tight at $90,000 as well. Thomas Stanley coined a phrase for the people this pattern claims most completely: under-accumulators of wealth. His research found them in enormous numbers among the highest earners in the country. Physicians, attorneys, executives, professionals who had spent decades producing significant income and had almost nothing to show for it in terms of accumulated assets, because the lifestyle had always expanded to consume whatever the income produced. The gap, the distance between what came in and what went out, had never been protected. It had been treated as surplus, as the reward for earning more, as the natural destination of every raise. And so it had never compounded. It had simply been spent, incrementally and invisibly, one reasonable upgrade at a time. The people who actually built wealth out of the same income levels did one thing differently. When earnings went up, they let the gap grow rather than letting the lifestyle grow. They treated that expanding distance not as surplus to be spent, but as the engine that would eventually produce the freedom they were working toward. They waited sometimes a full year after an income increase before making any lifestyle adjustment, not out of deprivation, out of the understanding that the life they wanted to eventually live was being funded by the gap they were protecting today, and that closing the gap to buy a better car this year was a direct trade against the options available to them in 20. Habit 6. They are precise about whose definition of normal they allow to govern their own financial choices. This is the habit that operates in the dimension most financial advice never reaches, and it is the one I would argue has the most profound effect on everything else, because all of the habits I've described, the calm relationship with numbers, the pause, the knowledge investment, the return lens, the protected gap, all of them are vulnerable to one force that can quietly dismantle them without a single conversation ever taking place. That force is the social environment you live inside of every day. Research on peer influence in financial behavior has established something that most people find uncomfortable to consider. The spending patterns of your immediate circle have a measurable, documented effect on your own financial decisions, and they produce this effect not through direct pressure, but through the gradual, invisible process of normalization. When the people around you replace their car every 3 years, that begins to feel like what responsible adults do. When the social habit of your circle is to spend freely on visible upgrades, on the restaurant tier, on the vacation category, the gravitational pull of that environment becomes a constant, quiet force on your own choices, and you feel it not as pressure, but as the entirely natural sense that certain things are what people like you simply do. The quietly wealthy are, underneath a surface of entirely ordinary sociability, exceptionally deliberate about whose financial standards they allow to calibrate their own sense of normal. They share the details of their financial lives with very few people: a partner, an advisor, occasionally a close friend who thinks about money the way they do. This is not secrecy. It is a recognition that the moment your financial situation becomes a performance for an external audience, you have introduced a gravitational force that will consistently pull your decisions toward display and away from growth. Wealth, they have found, accumulates fastest in private. It requires a certain quietness to compound undisturbed. And that quietness begins with the decision about who gets to define what normal looks like for you, because that definition, whoever holds it, is the invisible hand behind every financial choice you will ever make. Here is the honest thing about everything I have just described. None of it works through resolution. You cannot decide to have these habits the way you decide to wake up earlier or drink less coffee. They are not acts of will, they are the eventual, reliable output of a different kind of system, one in which the right financial behavior becomes the default rather than the exception, because the architecture around you has been designed to produce it rather than resist it. And this distinction matters more than anything else I could tell you, because people who try to adopt these habits through willpower alone almost always abandon them within weeks. Not because the habits are wrong, but because willpower is the wrong mechanism. Willpower depletes. Systems persist. The quietly wealthy are not more disciplined than you. They have built better systems, and then they let those systems do the work that most people are trying to do through repeated acts of self-control. The entry point I would give you is this: spend 1 week doing nothing except watching your own financial behavior with the same calm detachment I described in the first habit. Watch what triggers the impulse. Watch what happens in the moment before you open or avoid the banking app. Watch which purchases feel necessary and which ones, 3 days later, you have already stopped thinking about entirely. The purpose of this week is not to change anything. It is to see the system you are actually running, because you cannot redesign a machine you have never honestly examined. After that week, take the fourth habit, the return question, and apply it to every financial decision for 30 consecutive days. What does this return, and across what time frame? Some things will survive that question without difficulty. Many will not, and the ones that do not will become visible to you in a way that changes how you see them permanently. Once you have seen a purchase as a negative return position rather than a reasonable expense, you cannot unsee it. That shift in perception, once established, begins to alter the other 5 habits from the inside, not through effort, but through the change in how things look. The final piece is to stop relying on willpower to hold any of it together. The quietly wealthy do not maintain their habits through repeated acts of discipline. They automate the gap. They move money towards savings and investment before they see it, so that the lifestyle never has the opportunity to expand into it. They remove friction from the behaviors they want to keep and add friction to the ones they want to slow. They build an environment in which the right decision is simply what happens, rather than what requires energy to choose each time. You do not need to become a different person. You need to build a slightly different arrangement around the person you already are. 6 habits. A calm relationship with the numbers. A built-in pause before any significant decision. The consistent investment in understanding that cannot be taken. A single question substituted for the wrong one. A gap protected and treated as the engine of future freedom, and the quiet, deliberate choice of whose definition of normal gets to govern your own. None of these ask you to earn more than you earn. None require a dramatic change in the circumstances of your life. What they require is the willingness to decide that the audience you have been performing your financial life for was never actually watching, and that the energy spent on that performance has a far better destination. The man I described at the beginning of this conversation has never once, in 30 years, explained himself to anyone. He does not need to. His wealth does not live in what other people can see, and so it does not require their confirmation to remain real. He simply moves year after year in the same direction, patient, consistent, unimpressed by urgency, unbothered by comparison, and the distance between where he started and where he is now is the kind that cannot be produced by any single dramatic decision. It is the product of small things, repeated long enough that the mathematics of compounding did what mathematics always does when given enough time and enough consistency. Most people, looking at his life from the outside, see nothing remarkable. That invisibility is the point. It always has been. Because wealth that has to be visible to feel real is wealth that is being spent on its own performance rather than on the freedom it was built to produce. The people who understand that most deeply are the ones who end up with the most of both the wealth and the freedom, and they almost never look the part. That is available to you. It always has been. The only thing it has ever required is the willingness to stop mistaking the noise for the signal.